young people are looking at the adults in the room and saying, "Where are you?" That was concerning. And obviously, what played out for us on October 9th was such a smaller scale of what we saw exploding across the country. I remember I saw a YouTube clip, a Hillel president, a young woman on one of these campuses saying, "We're looking for the adults here to help us. Where are you? Where are the adults in the room right now?"
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways people's lives have changed since the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking to people around the world to learn how this profound moment in Jewish and global history continues to shift, shape, and change them. To learn more, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. I am sitting here, finally, with Alissa Zeffren. It took us a bit of time and some sweat and tears to get here, and I'm really excited to be welcomed to your home. So thank you so much.
Of course.
I would love it if you could just introduce yourself and share with us who you are and some of the many hats that you wear.
I'm Alissa Zeffren, and I was born and raised in the Chicagoland area. I currently teach at Ida Crown Jewish Academy. I teach Tanach and Jewish History there, and I run their student activities programs. I also run women's learning initiatives through the YU Torah Mitzion Kollel in Chicago, through NILI, the organization that's specifically geared towards women's learning. And I am the director of Student to Student in Chicago.
So let's talk about student to student. What is the organization? And then we'll sort of weave in these questions of October 7th and the challenges that you've had since.
Okay. So Student to Student is an organization that trains Jewish teens from all different backgrounds to really be advocates for Judaism and almost like ambassadors for the Jewish people, and to be able to go out into public school and parochial school classrooms and give peer-to-peer classroom-based presentations about Judaism. So the beauty of the program is we team students together who come from different backgrounds, so Orthodox, conservative, Reform, unaffiliated with any denomination, and team up and give really dynamic, engaging classroom presentations. And we show that Judaism is a whole tapestry and variety of observances, and people practice differently based on their home, their affiliation. So that aids in breaking down stereotypes about Judaism as well. So when a classroom meets our student presenters, our teen presenters, they haven't just met one Jewish person. They've met 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 Jewish teens their age who they can relate to and hopefully hold on to that meaningful experience and interaction so that when they do encounter stereotypes about Jews out in the world, they can kind of counterbalance that against the real Jews that they've met. Like, these aren't stereotypes, these are real people. That's a huge focus of the presentation, is not just to explain information about Judaism that these teens could get in a textbook or a YouTube video, but to really break it down to, this is my lived experience as a Jewish teen. Ask me questions, be curious. There's magic. It comes alive when they're presenting and when they get those questions. And
the organization feels to me sort of prescient, almost in a haunting way, because what's happened since October 7th is that people are realizing how much friction and difficulty there is for Jewish students on college campuses. And to educate them and talk about encounters of this kind prior to their arrival on campuses just, again, feels so wise and unfortunately so necessary right now. You have a really poignant story about the timing of your entry into this organization. I'm wondering if you can share.
So Student to Student has been around as an organization now for a little over 30 years. At the time that we brought it to Chicago, it had been around for around 25 years. It started in St. Louis from the St. Louis JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. Many JCRCs are run out of Jewish federations across America, and that's the structure here in Chicago. So in St. Louis, the JCRC was running this student-to-student program for close to 25 years before they started expanding to new cities. So by the time we reached out, they had already expanded to 3 new cities, and we were the 4th expansion city, and we launched in spring of 2019. Here's how Student to Student came to Chicago. My husband grew up in St. Louis, and he participated in Student to Student as a high school teen. So it was on my radar as an adult. And also as an NCSY advisor, I had teens that I mentored in NCSY who were from St. Louis. And so I heard them raving about it and how impactful it was thinking about being a Jew in the community and in the broader world. So in October of 2018, I was chaperoning a team of Ida Crown students to NCSY's JUMP program. National NCSY used to run almost like a Shark Tank kind of conference where you would bring a team of teens from a day school to these conferences in New York, and they would give you a challenge. Like, how can you meet and address this challenge in your hometown school community?
For those of us who don't know what NCSY is, could you share?
NCSY used to stand for National Conference of Synagogue Youth. Once it stopped being associated just with synagogue and Jewish youth at large. Now, NCSY doesn't have an official meaning behind the acronym, but it's such a name that is well known. NCSY does a lot of community outreach and inreach for Jewish teens and social, educational, religious, spiritual programming, Shabbatons, conferences, programs for Jewish teens to connect locally and have mentorship.
And the affiliation is really Orthodox, at least.
So it's affiliated with the OU, the Orthodox Union, and they have a whole national education department. So their education department was running this JUMP conference, which stood for Jewish Unity Mentorship Program. And that year, it happened to fall out the Sunday and Monday after the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. So really overnight, they pivoted the focus of the conference to what can we do in our hometowns and school-based communities to better Jewish advocacy and Jewish education. And I think most of the schools that were participating that year went a safer route of we don't have access to doing Jewish advocacy outside our insular Jewish bubble. So a lot of schools did like, how can we increase inspiration in our community, in our schools? And they were lovely projects. And my students were thinking like, we could go that route, but what we really want to do is get out of our school bubble in our community and speak to teens who've never met Jews before.
These are primarily teens who are in Orthodox or Jewish day school.
Yes. So the team that I was mentoring were Ida Crown sophomores at the time.
And Ida Crown is the local Orthodox co-ed high school.
Yes, the local modern Orthodox co-ed high school here in Skokie. And so these teens, it was amazing where they were coming from. We want to get out of just the Jewish community and do real advocacy work. Can we do something like that? And I think that I was totally positioned with the right information at the right time to facilitate this project, because had my husband not grown up doing this, or had I not had those interactions as an NCSY advisor, it wouldn't have been on my radar that a program like this even existed. Sometimes it's beautiful and it's magical when young people have these ideas like, how can we change the world? And unless you have the right tools to empower them, you end up being like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but we can't do that. So it was such a rewarding opportunity to say, that's a great idea and we can do that. I know the right person in place that can help us. Let me call them.
Can you speak to the emotional impact that you and your students were processing when they came to this really wonderful idea, but directly in the wake of the Tree of Life shooting?
I think when tragedy strikes, we have a whole range of human responses and emotions, and these teens didn't want to just feel helpless, like the problem was beyond them. And I think that this gave us a meaningful, immediate avenue to feel like we were doing something important and to chip away at a larger problem of anti-Semitism.
And what about you? I mean, you were this grown-up managing a logistical pivot and almost a philosophical pivot in some ways. But I think you must also have been processing fear or grief as this was happening. Did it provide you with an outlet? How was this for you? What can you say about it?
I definitely think I was processing it alongside the students. And as soon as they said, let's get out of our bubble, it just immediately clicked. And I thought, okay, there's a program that does this. And what would you think if we reached out to them and tried to figure out how we could bring it here to Chicago? And I think young people are looking for that. They're looking for mentors in their life to help them run with big ideas, even if it involves taking a risk, even if it involves setbacks and failures. I think that's great. You can try something, and if it doesn't work, then you can pivot. I've realized this in my own career. I like tackling things that are big problems, even if it involves taking some risks, not always being completely successful, having to pivot. But if we don't chip away at these big problems, then who's going to? And this is a meaningful way to chip away at a really big problem and have a big impact. So immediately it clicked for me. We should go in this route.
So you referenced this concept of the bubble. I'm wondering, when you and your students made this decision that you needed to break through this to make sure that people's hatred was quelled by an encounter of human beings who are Jewish, did you have resources or a network in other communities, or how did you develop one?
So when I reached out to the national student to student, they have a system for how they try to reach out and get into schools. I also leaned on my husband's connections. So Alissa Zeffren, who at the time was working for NCSY and had run some Jewish student union clubs in some of the public schools. So he had some connections with public school teachers. So I started by reaching out to those teachers first to see if we could bring student to student to their schools. I did a little bit of cold emailing, just finding some teacher information on school websites and looking for either like a social studies department chair or a theology department chair, and just pitched the program to them. I'd say like we emailed around 40 schools in our pilot year and got 4 responses. For any of our new chapters of student to student starting up in new cities, like without the connections, it takes a while to build, but I would say persistence is our best asset. As a classroom teacher myself, I get all these different like educational opportunity and initiative, and it all kind of looks like education teacher spam. So how do you distinguish your pitch so it looks like it's more personal and it might be something really worthwhile? It's also helpful to leverage teacher relationships that they have with other schools. They could say, hey, we had this in our classroom. It worked really well. You should try it. So it was a combination of cold emailing, working some connections, and then word of mouth, seeing our flyer places and reaching out to us.
I think it's important to also mention that the students at Ida Crown do regularly encounter students outside of the Jewish sphere.
Yeah. So a lot of our students, either with summer jobs or jobs that they have in school, all of the sports conferences that we participate in at Ida Crown, but it doesn't provide the same setting or context to just say, hey, tell me about what it's like to be Jewish, in the same way that we create that opening and we enable that access through our presentations. A lot of young people today are kind of raised to think that it's super taboo, right? We always have the expression, don't ask people about religion and politics. So we've created this taboo around just asking people about what it's like to practice something differently.
What was the reception like initially?
I would say either we heard like nothing back from people. Once in a while, a teacher would say, oh, I don't think we need that here. So I'm not really sure if they had a full understanding of what our program was like to come to that conclusion. But otherwise, the reception is so warm out in the schools that we're in. There's always a context for us being there. So sometimes we present in a comparative religions setting, and they're studying all different world religions. And those teachers do amazing projects to get their kids exposed to the religions as they're practiced on the ground. So taking them to different houses of worship, introducing them to different faith leaders that represent those different communities. One of the schools that we presented to, they had been taking students on a field trip to local Chabad. Chabad is the different local branches of Lubavitch Jewish outreach that exist across the world. And so often a Chabad synagogue will exist where there's a small Jewish community and they wouldn't otherwise have access to observant life.
And so these are Hasidic Jews.
Whose mission it is to bring this kind of outreach to Jews worldwide.
So they're very used to presenting Judaism to even Jews who might have little exposure. This is in their lane.
Yes. So I think something that makes student to student unique in these spaces, yes, of course, you could bring a classroom to a Chabad or hear from a rabbi. What's really unique about student to student is the peer-to-peer component, and that's really powerful. So teens are used to hearing adults talk at them all day long. And as a teacher, we try to design all sorts of creative learning environments and opportunities and contexts for students to really own the learning themselves. But again, it's still adult facilitated and led. And I think there's something so refreshing to just hear from people your own age explaining what their faith means to them. I also think in our culture, it's less common for teens to feel that comfortable talking, especially in a public school setting. This is what my faith means to me. I think a lot of kids are more worried about just fitting in. Even the Jewish teens in the audiences in the schools that we present to, they come up to us afterwards. They're like, I'm Jewish too. A lot of my peers don't even know that. I don't have an opportunity to really talk about it. None of my peers really understand what Judaism is, or I don't know what that means. So it's so nice that like now they know. And sometimes students have asked, like, how can we join student to student, especially in places where there are really low to no Jews in those schools. The reception is always warm. And the teachers that invite us in, they're some of the best people I know.
So let's pivot now to October 7th. I want to ask you where you were, how you found out. You are a religious Jew. Your phone was not on. Can you tell us about how you found out what was happening and how you processed it?
So for religious observant Jews in America, finding out, it was really in like bits and pieces. So it was Simchas Torah morning. My husband came home from shul, and I guess some of the security guards had some information. The rabbis had some information. And what was coming out was just too horrific and unbelievable. It was just shock and disbelief. This couldn't be happening.
So one thing that observant Jews had to figure out was how they would observe or not observe Simchat Torah, which is literally the joy of the Torah. How did you mark that day as opposed to how you usually do your Simchat Torah celebrations?
So for me and for our family, it was still so important, I think, for our community to still show up. Like, we're not going to not show up to our synagogue on a day that's so important to us. I think a lot of it was like looking to the rabbi to give us guidance also, to set the tone. I think it was more meaningful, definitely very intentional. We're going to make this a nurturing space. It's comforting to be with community members when everyone's going through such a tragedy.
At what point did you realize how student to student was going to play a role in the recovery aftermath of this event?
Long before October 7th, we had already booked presentations in 2 of the schools that we present to out in the suburbs. We like to present to them on the same day because it's such a schlep. It's a big drive. So we had scheduled presentations for October 9th. It was like the post-holiday day off of school. So definitely on October 8th, even like as soon as Chag was over, I had to pivot and decide very quickly, can we still present? How do the parents feel about it? Does everyone feel safe? How does my principal at Ida Crown feel about it? How does the national leadership of student to student feel about it? How did the teachers on the ground at the schools we're presenting to? So it was a lot of immediately getting on the phone and calling a lot of people. So messaging the students, do you all still feel comfortable? Please have your parents reach out and give me expressed permission. We're going to have an emergency prep meeting tonight to make sure that we're all in the right headspace. And we're not going to let this completely absorb what we're here to talk about. What does it mean to live as a Jew? It's not a tragic experience. Like, we're still bringing our love of Judaism to our presentation. Of course, we have to mention what happened. This is international news. I talked to the national leadership. What's the best way to bring up and talk about what's going on? And the guidance that we give students is always bring it back to you. Like, how are you feeling? Do you have friends and family in Israel? Like, it's the human stories that make our presentations great. So this is a human story. How does it impact you? How are your family? Whatever details that could get into the realm of politics are best navigated by the classroom teachers themselves, who have those relationships with their students, and they can better navigate those dynamics. But we can talk about its impact on us, and then keep the presentation focused on what it's like to be a Jewish teen in America. So that was going to be our plan.
Did most of the students slated to go on October 9th go? What did the parents say?
The students and parents said, we feel it's important more than ever to go and show up. That's what we do. We show up. And the principal said, as long as I check in with the classroom teachers and just get a sense of the pulse on the ground there, as long as I have permission from all the parents, we can still go forward. I was really concerned, what would it look like for us to cancel? Israel had not even launched any kind of defensive retaliation at that point. Does it make us look like we're ashamed to be there? And I didn't want to project anything of the sort. We are proud of who we are, and we love our connection to Israel, and we're not going to shy away from that. It was really late at night once we sorted this all out. So immediately in the morning, I checked in with the different teachers, and one of the teachers said, "Oh, I was going to reach out to you." Our principal asked what you thought about whether we should postpone. So
I'm on pins and needles with this one. So then what?
I said, well, on our end, like, our teens still really want to come.
More than ever.
More than ever. One of the goals of Student to Student is not just to educate about Judaism, but really to break down harmful stereotypes, to give a human face to what does it mean to be a Jew. And with all the media that people consume today and all the misinformation out there, we already were starting to hear what kind of absurd and grotesque things were being espoused on college campuses. And not just about Israel, but about Jews. And that's what our training is for. It's about, hypothetically, when we encounter anti-Semitism in the world, like this wasn't hypothetical. This was very, very real, and it felt very important. And the students felt like we've trained to do this, and this is what we want to use our voices to do. So the teacher said, actually, we think maybe it's a little too fresh that, it just happened. What would you think about coming and presenting about Judaism, but not mentioning anything about Israel? And so just to give a little bit more background, I said we usually present in comparative religions classes or a social studies class that is learning about world cultures and Judaism. Sometimes we present in classes that are learning about the Holocaust. So this was a comparative religions class. So Israel is one of the 5 main things on our outline of what we cover in our presentations. We talk about Jewish life cycle events. We talk about Shabbat and Kashrut, sometimes Jewish holidays, Holocaust and anti-Semitism, and Israel. Throughout, it's very interactive. We field a lot of questions on the spot. We encourage them to ask at any time. So it's very interactive. But to ask us not to talk about Israel is asking us not to present about 1/5 of our presentation. And it's a lot to do with the history and our connection to the land throughout Jewish history, and a lot about like the teens' personal connections to Israel. So we don't get into politics, really.
When you and I discussed doing this interview, it was really important for you to make sure that people understand that these relationships, they survived this encounter, and that these are people that you respect and that you care about, and that even though there was a negative experience and potentially a rupture, these are still human beings to you as well, right? These were not insurmountable circumstances for you or for the program.
Absolutely. At this point, most of the schools that we were in, we had relationships with those schools for about 5 years or so. I also want to mention that most of the teachers that we present with, almost all of them, reached out completely independently just to check in, either via text, email, phone call. Like, I heard about the attack on the news. I just want to check in with you and your presenters. I just want to make sure everyone's safe. Everyone is going into even this situation with the best of intentions and with wanting to be sensitive to everyone on the ground and navigating their own school communities and concerns. So the teacher said, okay, well, what if you came and presented about the different aspects of Judaism, but you don't mention Israel at all? And so I said, I don't think we can do that. We can't come and pretend like nothing's going on. And we can't hide a core aspect of who we are as a people. I understand that our country is divided on the war, but to reduce all Jewish people to what's going on in the war, whatever your political position might be, seems very damaging to how we view Jews and present our understanding of Judaism. We can't platform Jewish voices right now because it's not the right time because of the war. That seems very problematic as a people. Like, our connection to the land goes back thousands of years. To try to abstract our story from that core part would feel really disingenuous. And so the teacher also threw out an idea. We could reach out to students who we feel might be sensitive to you being there and give them an opportunity or permission to opt out of being in the presentation, give them a study period. That really shut it down. I was just baffled. What does that mean to give teens the opportunity to opt out of hearing about Jews and Judaism?
For these cities that have had this really discouraging response, how would you advise them to navigate the next steps?
I think there's a lot of fear driving those responses, fear of fallout in their own school communities. I think the more that we build human relationships with teachers on the ground, we have video clips of presentations. They can see what it looks like. You can ask them, do you want to see a sample presentation before bringing it into your school? Let people be informed. Disarm some of those fears. Let them see the program for themselves and the benefits. Or, hey, I totally hear your concerns having never seen a presentation before. Would you like to talk to one of the teachers in the schools that we present with and hear from their perspective what the benefits are to their students? Because the teachers that we present to, they really rave about the feedback One of the teachers we present with, he always asks on his final, what was the most meaningful experience or learning experience that you've had in this semester? And one of the most popular responses is the student-to-student presentation. A lot of the classroom teachers will have their students write a reflection that they'll share with the class or with the teacher. The exit survey facilitates that a little bit, but the more that the classroom teacher can do after we leave as well, the more impactful our presentation will be.
Can I ask you to backtrack for a second? In some ways, the program had worked, right? Because this happened and immediately the people that you had worked with understood the human dimension of the tragedy. But were you only baffled when this occurred, or were there other reactions or feelings that you had when you were asked on October 9th /Israel from this presentation?
I think I was a little saddened too and concerned. What does that look like to give teens permission to opt out of hearing from Jews? It felt like you're giving tacit permission to find Jews offensive. I want to be sensitive to you, but in that sensitivity, are you giving permission to find Jews offensive?
Or at very least, to silence them.
Yeah, it's okay that you, in your culture, whoever you might be, would find Jews in your class, platforming them in this way, that you would find that offensive or triggering, so you don't have to come today. That bothered me. And that concerned me because we can see how something taken to more of an extreme, how that played out in the video clips that we've seen in the last 2 years of college campuses and certain zones being unsafe spaces for Jews. That was a microcosm of what we saw exploding on college campuses. And again, not intended. These are teachers and schools with the best of intentions and with inclusivity in their mission statements, and having to navigate and balance and being sensitive to everyone's concerns. Where does that leave Jews? And again, you do have a handful of, maybe less than a handful of Jewish students in some of these schools. I don't think they were aware that this is happening behind the scenes, but how does that position those Jewish teens to be openly Jewish if in other contexts you have someone else being told they can opt out of a presentation about Judaism?
You're very measured and you're very empathetic. Something about your approach right now is giving me a bit more compassion maybe than I've had before to the struggles that college administrators faced when these encampments cropped up. I think from within my particular Jewish lens, I was so outraged. But now I can kind of see, as you're talking about the secondary school environment, that really administrators felt paralyzed and really struggled to know how to navigate this scenario. Can you maybe speak to your awareness of their struggles at the time?
From my perspective, it sounds like it was really coming from a place of let's predict, let's foreshadow what we're going to see in terms of student responses to this and parent responses. How can we get ahead of that? In the end, we did postpone. And I said, we can't come back and present until we can give our full presentation. So they said, why don't we wait a couple months and see what the temperature is like in the school, in the news, and then we'd love to have you back. Other schools that we were slated to present at within a couple weeks out or within the month didn't postpone. I did hear some murmurings from some other teachers that they just reached out to students, encouraging them to be there, but that there wouldn't be a penalty if they didn't feel comfortable. I do see that administrators, especially on college campuses, there is a sense of paralysis, not knowing what the right thing is to do. But I don't think that's an excuse. Young people are looking at the adults in the room and saying, where are you? That was concerning. And obviously, what played out for us on October 9th was such a smaller scale of what we saw exploding across the country. I remember I saw a YouTube clip, a Hillel president, a young woman, on one of these campuses saying, we're looking for the adults here to help us. Where are you? Where are the adults in the room right now? It's very dangerous when the adults or the people in positions of authority to give the moral guidance, the what should we do from here, having that paralysis.
But seeing it at this smaller scale really has helped me understand all these dynamics that are at play.
It's also like, where does it end? Luckily in America, we've been in a better position than some places in Europe. I did read an article in December of 2023 out of the UK where parents had complained to their school board that they should postpone or not teach the Holocaust that year because it felt like taking sides. Like the school was taking sides to still teach the Holocaust curriculum while the war was going on. It was pretty astounding. And again, like viewing it with that understanding of where are we headed? if we censor Jews out of our story because it might be offensive.
What has been the interest, either less or more, of students since October 7th in participating in student to student? What have you seen in terms of their engagement?
I've only seen growth in students who want to be involved as student presenters. I haven't seen any drop off, not in our region here in the Chicagoland area. I think young Jewish teens are also looking for ways to feel like they're making a meaningful impact. Our public school Jewish teens participate in a lot of different opportunities for Jewish teens, even in their schools when there are Jewish student clubs, either Jewish Student Union or Jewish Student Connection. But even within those spaces, they don't get to get up usually in front of a class and just explain who they are. And in a way that just is so disarming and just invites people to be curious about us and ask questions. It really is a unique experience and opportunity for them to use their voices in such a meaningful way.
What about the reception? Has the warmth faded a little bit within the schools that you go to?
Not that I've noticed or seen. I do reach out to teachers and I say, what's the temperature like in the school? Any concerns that you have that we should be aware of, especially in talking about Israel. This is how we approach it. Let me know if you have any questions. I don't want to blindside anyone. And so nothing was surfaced in those conversations, but we found out afterwards that students had led a walkout in protest of the war the week before we came. Other students who weren't in those classes found out that there was a Jewish student group presenting about Judaism and had mentioned Israel. And the teacher told me only later that some students put Free Palestine stickers like in the hallway on the lockers leading up to her class, but she took them down before my presenters got there. She didn't want them to feel intimidated or like it wasn't welcoming. And she really felt like that isn't representative of our class or our school. And so I only found that out afterwards.
Did your students ever share that they felt afraid, either emotionally, intimidated, as you say, or physically?
They never felt physically afraid. We did have one experience where as soon as they said, the next topic we're going to be speaking about is Israel, we did experience a student get up and leave the room, not willing to hear whatever it was that we were going to be presenting about. We do give an exit survey after every presentation. What's interesting at that school, in the same exact presentation, we had one student in the exit survey say, I think it was insensitive that they brought up Israel and that they're able to travel there. And then in the exact same exit survey from the exact same class, another student said, I thought it was really sensitive the way they talked about Israel. So I do think that if you're coming and hearing from us, and as soon as we say the word Israel, you shut down, I don't know that there's that much that we could do to change someone's worldview. But for someone who really has no idea about Judaism, Israel, the Jewish connection to the land, the culture, and then you hear our presentation, you're going to come out having really learned something.
Have you found that the results of these exit surveys are different now than they were before October 7th?
I would say that's the only difference that I've seen. The exit surveys are overwhelmingly positive feedback. We don't ask anything specific about Israel. The write-in comments are like completely optional. So those were unsolicited comments that we got from that presentation. We do ask before today, to your knowledge, have you ever met a Jewish person before? And it depends where we're presenting, but in those schools, it's like a third to a half have never met or meaningfully interacted with a Jewish person before that they knew of.
You mean the schools where there were the walkouts?
Yes. In a lot of schools, we try to go to places where they have less exposure to Jews and Judaism because that's where we feel like some of the most important work that needs to be done. We also ask, what level of knowledge did you have about Judaism coming into the presentation? How would you rate your knowledge of Jews and Judaism now? Would you want to learn more? And so everything is like a Likert scale rating. And what was your most memorable part of the presentation? What would you like to know more about? So those are some of the questions, the style of questions that we do ask. In the free response section we get, I thought it was so meaningful to hear from people my own age talk about what Judaism means to them. I didn't know how many similarities there were between Judaism and my own faith, or I don't feel comfortable talking about my faith in a public school setting. And these are also like Christian teens from all different backgrounds. And so it's interesting to hear that kind of feedback. They say they loved how engaging it was, that we don't just present to them. We pass things around. There's a lot of show and tell. We pass around like miniature Torah replica for students to look at. When we talk about Shabbat, we pass around challah for everyone to try. When we talk about kashrut, we pass around a pack of Oreos. And for them to find a kosher symbol, we talk about like what would make processed foods kosher versus animals and other products. So it really is very hands-on. And then they can find a kosher symbol for the rest of their lives.
So I think a lot of what you're hearing in these exit surveys feels like an endorsement of the approach and of student to student specifically. So if anyone wants to start a new chapter,
absolutely,
please be encouraged. But I'm confused by this idea that before October 7th, more students thought that they had encountered a Jew.
No, that didn't change.
Oh, what was the piece that changed?
The piece that changed would maybe be more unsolicited feedback about Israel.
Got it.
It's still very rare. The student who said, I thought that they navigated questions about Israel very sensitively, that I thought was really interesting. I'm wondering, a lot of it's anonymous. There's no way to follow up with that individual student, but I'm wondering if that student had heard murmurings of other students who felt differently and felt the need to tell us that it was very sensitive.
As opposed to what they had encountered up until that point.
Right. It was obviously something that at least she was aware of. And again, also interesting that two people in the same presentation, one could say the mention of Israel is offensive, and the other could say it was handled so sensitively, which is our goal, to talk about Israel in a way that is not going to turn people off from our experience as Jews, not turn people off from Israel. That's authentic to our experience of Israel. We're not engaging in any apologetics, and to hopefully be a little enlightening to people. If you have a very one-sided view of what Israel is, this is going to broaden your view.
Tip the scales.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned being horrified by this article that you read in the UK, where Holocaust education is slanted as unfair or biased.
Siding with Israel.
Siding with Israel. There was this educational conference, and in that forum, there was a fierce debate about whether to continue to acknowledge Jewish Heritage Month. I'm wondering if, as an educator who knows other educators outside the Jewish sphere, you can speak to this trend and if there's anything that's hopeful to you and anything that's particularly concerning.
What's hopeful to me is the ongoing relationships that we do cultivate and continue in with the teachers, with the schools, the positive reception that we have by the students, this overwhelming warmth. We often get questions at the end of a presentation. What can we do to be better allies to Jews? What would you recommend? So that's hopeful. I do often wonder whether the loudest voices that we hear across social media are really representative. What does it look like to empower the quieter voices to be more knowledgeable and to have the tools necessary to call out anti-Semitism when they do witness it, whether it's on social media, whether it's like an aside joke or comment that a peer makes, but to really empower teens who otherwise wouldn't have the language and tools to call it out and to help give them that. And we also say, we would hope that you would call out anti-Semitism just like you would racism, prejudice, or any other form of bigotry that you see in your social groups. This isn't just about the Jews. Part of what we do and what we share with them is this is a model of how you can approach people who are different from you. You can approach with curiosity, empathy, understanding, and not reducing any one group to a stereotype.
This is a very difficult question, and it's okay if you don't have an answer. I'm not sure any of us do. Do you think that there's a place in this work or in this dialogue with Jewish teens who've explicitly identified themselves as anti-Zionists?
So we haven't had any presenters who have said, I'm anti-Zionist. We do have presenters who have said very clearly, I don't support the current government in Israel. How do I navigate that? And we've talked about how oftentimes in America, we don't support our current administration. We have different political parties with different viewpoints. In Israel, there's dozens of parties and viewpoints. And that's what living in a healthy working democracy looks like. You can be critical of policies. You can be critical of an administration. It's not appropriate in the middle of a presentation to air those grievances. But just like you can criticize a politician or a presidency, doesn't make you anti-American. you can be critical of politicians in Israel and not be anti-Israel. So I think maybe some of the other cities have had to navigate more. What if you have a staunchly anti-Zionist presenter? Like, what does that look like? I think it's hard. It puts the other student presenters in a really tough position too. So I'm not really sure how that would play out. But
I'm actually kind of moved and encouraged that there are kids who want to do this who openly say, I don't agree with the policies of the Israeli government, and they still want to present and speak to what it is to be Jewish and engaged, even if it's critically, with Israel right now.
I also think that's an important nuance and distinction for young people to have, especially before they go off to college. And it's healthy to cultivate that in the safety of a Jewish space where you can ask questions and you can explore your feelings in that setting before you go off to college. And there's just a lot competing for your attention and affiliations. And it's good when students know who they are and they have the tools and the language to stand up for what they believe in and engage in healthy, nuanced dialogue with other people. I think that there's also a lot of fear. I give total compassion and empathy to college students across America who have had to navigate the different challenges of the last almost 2 years. Can't imagine what that's like.
Well, I think that this is a good place to end. I want to thank you so much for offering your perspective and the history and the important work of student to student.
Thank you, Manya. It's been great to be here with
you. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.
למעלה